Good morning. First of all, I'd like to thank AIGA, Dana, for the invitation to come share with you. This is my first AIGA conference, and very much I feel these themes of generosity, inclusion, vulnerability, and my hope today is to share my personal story, my journey with you in full transparency, all the ins and outs, trials and tribulations, and lessons that I've learned with the hope that it can inspire you. And definitely I feel responsible to do that just based on all the amazing talks that I've heard in the last couple of days. But let me take you on a journey. Very much, as Dana mentioned, I am a design leader within BCG Digital Ventures, a new incubator inside of Boston Consulting Group. We were a founding team that met each other roughly 6 years ago, and we've sort of cut our teeth in this interesting model. And then BCG took us on board about 4 years ago, and we're now upward of about 600 people across roughly 8 innovation centers around the world, where we incubate new businesses for a lot of large corporates that BCG sort of serves already in a strategy capacity. But we represent design, tech, and business sort of coming together to really figure out how to create and launch these new startups for these large businesses. But you'll have to bear with me. If I go back to the start of my journey, and not to be cliche, but I think like a lot of us, my journey started with an innate curiosity for creative. Like many of you, I sketched for hobby all the time, but I didn't know at the time that design could be a professional path for me. Where I grew up, I was born an hour upstate from New York City, and I spent most of my life in the Midwest and East Coast. And most of that was within the Downriver Detroit area. So big auto, all my neighbors worked for all the big auto companies, and business and engineering were the two paths that were celebrated. And coming up from a middle class home, when I thought about college, there needed to be a good job on the other side of that journey, because the family was sacrificing a lot to send me to school. And so I sort of was aligning myself to a more pragmatic path. And engineering was exciting, I think, because of the intersection of sciences, and there's drafting in engineering. So I was like, oh, that actually fits me more than perhaps business. And so thankfully I was able to attend the University of Notre Dame, and I studied mechanical engineering there. And a lot of the companies that were coming to campus to recruit mechanical engineers, a lot of the big auto, a lot of aerospace companies, but a lot of the messages was, you know what, for a new recruit, we're gonna bring you into our organization, and we're gonna allow you to basically, perhaps work the plant floor for 8 to 10 years and do a lot of operational tasks to learn our business before we let you do any real engineering work. And it wasn't necessarily an exciting value prop for someone looking at the start of their career. But there was one industry that had very much a pressing need. It was the nuclear power generation industry. They were facing a crisis, what I would call a knowledge crisis, in that the industry hadn't hired young engineers for the previous 10 to 15 years. And a lot of the original engineers that developed and invented a lot of the nuclear operating plants that are existing around the world, they were on the verge of retirement. And these nuclear OEMs were on the risk of losing all this knowledge as people were leaving the workforce. And so they had a sense of urgency to hire in and get these people up to speed as fast as possible. So you can imagine, being a young engineer up and coming, to have these nuclear OEMs coming to campus with this enticement. You can actually do real engineering from day one with us. Come on board, we have all this need, and you'll have an exciting runway in this new field. So I bid on that and ended up joining the nuclear power industry. So my next 5 years was staring down the barrel of many of these reactor vessels. So this is an open reactor vessel with the lid off, and the coolant in the system is actually flooding the refueling cavity. So this plant now is open for a core refueling motion. So they're actually moving fuel assemblies in and out of the core. And so these plants come down every 18 months or so to basically replace a third of the reactor core for the next 18 months of energy production. And all that water, when the plant is operating, is actually in the system, and it's buttoned up, and it's cycling to do its thermodynamic functions. But when it's open, the fuel actually looks like that. The water has this murky blue feel to it. And if the water weren't there, we would all perish because it's just it's a super radioactive sort of environment, and the water is a protective shielding for that. So, but I promise I'm not radioactive. You are safe sitting near me, except for you in the front row. Make you uncomfortable. But, and this gives you a sense of like what it was like to work above the water. So I had the benefit of working and learning with some amazingly talented teams, technicians, engineers that were really good at their craft. And we used long-handle tooling to engage the components below. Long-handle tooling, robotics, camera systems, just to navigate these very hazardous radioactive environments. And we all had to wear dosimetry and all kinds of instrumentation on our bodies to make sure that we weren't getting exposed to harmful radiation. Whoops. But also, I think a big lesson was learning just what it takes to actually deliver something, a product, over the line, and for that product to meet the needs of multiple stakeholders, and also to make the public safer in terms of how do we deal with this nuclear technology and make it even more safe as we move to the future. And unfortunately, I think we've all seen when accidents and those scenarios happen, how much it sets the clock of the nuclear industry back to recover from that and work on meaningful innovation to make this technology safe. So this is another shot of us working over the upper half of the reactor. So when the plant opens up, you can see the vessel opening above at the top of the picture. We actually take out the mechanical upper half of the reactor and put it in a stand downstream in the refueling cavity. So this is almost like an Olympic-sized swimming pool to give you a sense of the space. And so we built this yellow crane, a giant crane. So half of it sits in the water on top of that mechanical internals package, and the other half sits above the water so that we can actually use crane and rigging to move these long-handled tools into position. That's actually a younger me on the left side of the picture, standing on the containment wall, and I'm helping to supervise the engineering activities. And those folks are actually using those tools with this moving bridge, and they're taking reactor components, as you see in the right-hand thumbnail. They're moving them into position for refurbishing, and we're replacing mechanical parts to extend the life of these reactors for another 20 to 30 years. So pretty crazy stuff. And I think technology was out of necessity in this world, because oftentimes you're dealing with a nuclear plant that's 30 years old, perhaps in some cases. And so you have drawings, architectural drawings of how they built the plant in the first place. But when you crack that thing open and realize what is actually there, it's often different than the drawings. And then when we're putting in any new stuff, any new hardware, mating the existing with the new was often a tremendous challenge. And as an engineer in this world, you had to everything had to make sense. Everything had to be rational against classical physics, classical mechanics. And so always breaking out the calculator and making sure the classical hand calcs jived with what you were seeing in reality. And you also had to test it. That wasn't enough. You had to do empirical testing to make sure your assumptions were valid. And we used CAD, CAM, and finite element analysis to simulate accidents, simulate scenarios, simulate when things blow up, what happens, and how does the system recover from an accident scenario. So those curiosities for exploring the product world within engineering that were definitely satiated. But a new curiosity emerged in that experience, in that I became more curious about business. Like, why was the company dealing with certain nuclear utilities versus others? Why were contracts orchestrated the way they were? And I lacked that business acumen. I lacked that business layer. And so to feel more empowered as a technology professional, I pursued business education to sort of scratch that itch. And thankfully, right down the road from where I was working, Carnegie Mellon was very much a friendly business school for engineers looking to add that business acumen. And so I came into this environment for the next 2 years, was thankfully able to win a scholarship to attend full time. But I'll be honest, the business school environment, while it was rewarding to step into a 2-year sort of career refresh and sort of look at things with fresh eyes and perspective, there were just a lot of voices. And this is a fun picture of a typical MBA career fair where there's hundreds of company booths thousands of students all trying to make a connection. And there were just so many voices in my business school journey. And I felt that my inner voice was sort of dying in that experience. A lot of people were saying, well, you should go into investment banking because that's where the money is. Or you should go into management consulting because that's where the influence is. Don't you want to make money? Don't you want to have power and influence? And I'm just trying to empower myself to do the things that I want to do. But thankfully, that creative inclination from my youth never quite died. And I allowed myself to explore that itch even outside of the business school environment. So while I was doing my studies, I was helping friends that had businesses in the Pittsburgh area, whether it be painting murals for coffee shops or painting restaurant tables with artwork, to all kinds of just things just to find outlets for my creative passion. And thankfully, when I was in this environment, I allowed that creative curiosity to inform the type of companies that I would hopefully choose to work for post-graduation. And thankfully, Nike was at the top of that list because it embodied the strategy, it embodied the technology and innovation, but it also had a tremendous creative capability within it. And so it became sort of a dream. Like I would love to work in that environment where I could explore all these sort of creative curiosities. And Nike was at one of these famous mega career fairs. And you can imagine Nike. I mean, they had a very inconspicuous booth. You couldn't even barely see the swoosh. They didn't want to really signal that they were there, but there was still a line clear around the convention center to talk to them. And the first gentleman that I encountered, he had a sort of a rude demeanor. He's like, "Why Nike?" That's all he said, not hello. And based on his body language, it was clear he didn't want to hear, "Oh, I love your shoes. I love the athletes you work with," because he's probably hearing that 99 times out of every 100. But we just had an honest conversation around, here's where I'm coming from. Here's what I've done before. I have this product passion. I have this, I want to mate that with business. And I see that you represent the same things. And you represent things that I'm missing that I want to learn. And I think I can bring some intangibles to you that could benefit the Nike organization. And thankfully, at the end of that 2-minute conversation, he handed me his business card and told me to keep in touch. And so through the course of my studies, I just kept in touch, letting him know what I was working on, and he let me know what they were up to. And after 2 years of that relationship, he invited me to come out to Beaverton, Oregon to interview. And thankfully gave me an opportunity to join Nike, at the start of 2005. So I entered in a business capacity at world headquarters in Beaverton, Oregon. Super excited. Nike's a wonderful, environment, very inspirational, almost feels like going to college again. But the product person within me, the creatively curious person within me, wanted to figure out where the action was in Nike and sort of be mindful to the day job of the business tasks that I was asked to perform at the corporate planning group. But I was networking like crazy to figure out where the product and innovation was happening. And sure enough, a lot of those coffee chats turned into opportunities to actually work for free, to help show people how passionate I was about their particular department. And at first, a lot of my planning friends were saying, I don't know how it looks, you being over there with trying to network with the designers or innovation people, how would that make finance look? And even when I approached the product people too, sometimes there were stereotypes of, by title, that's the numbers guy. Regardless of whatever his story is, you're a numbers guy, get out of here. So just fighting through these misconceptions about, what I was about and putting my story out there to see who I could find resonance with was sort of the act. But thankfully it worked, where after doing a couple stretch assignments and showing people that I was passionate and that I could contribute in a product capacity, I joined the global footwear organization after a year and a half. And the timing was perfect because they were on a push to bring more of lean manufacturing principles into the upstream ideation process in the time span between when a designer puts pen to paper and when they actually confirm the sample for mass production. So that window of product creation time, there was an opportunity to come in and help make an impact. And I could leverage my engineering background with sort of the new business knowledge that I had. And one of the big charters was to help the creative community at Nike better articulate their design intent to offshore partners. So the old way of making shoes, you would do a napkin sketch, send that over to Asia, and they would have to make a guess at what you intended from your napkin sketch. So you'd get a sample back after several weeks, and you'd get something that might be 20 to 30% accurate to your initial napkin sketch, and then you would tape up that sample, you would redline and mark up the actual sample, and you would take the pattern files and redline those and send it back to Asia, and you're waiting again for another sample to come back, and that sample might be 60% of what you wanted. So it's just this back and forth dance where you're just like waiting and painfully going through a very like wasteful process. And think about the physical sample churn in that as well. So what we wanted to do was still enable the designers to do their natural process of napkin sketching and 2D sketching, but then at some point get into the 3D programs and actually lay your design intent over a 3-dimensional last and send that over to Asia, and then you get back something that was 90% accurate to what you wanted. And then you could spend more time really finessing the soul of that product versus all the waste that we sort of saw in the process. So that was really, really fun to help the designers do that, enable them. Thankfully, I was able to broker some inroads with the Jordan brand by helping them get like the latest fancy computers to be able to do this. So I made a lot of friends by arming the designers in Jordan brand with some cool tools. But then a lot of my newfound creative friends saw the work I was doing for hobby, in particular the Jordan brand, and they encouraged me to actually try it on real shoes. Like, you could actually do this. You get some raw talent. We're willing to work with you to flex your muscles. I'm like, oh, this would be awesome, please. So the footwear design director at the time was Dwayne Edwards. He's no longer at Nike. He ended up opening the world's first footwear design academy called Pensole. I'd highly encourage you to look into it. So, but under Dwayne's guidance, and he was the hardest working guy that I knew at Nike, he'd get in at 6 in the morning. So for a good year, I would meet him at 6 in the morning at his office. We'd talk through sort of what it would take to begin a design journey on some of their briefs that he didn't have enough designers for. So I picked up some of those briefs without a home. We would work together until about 9 a.m., where he had to go lead his design team, and I had to go do my digital operations job for the creative community. And then at night, I would work on his assignments till the wee hours of the morning, and then meet him the next morning at 6 a.m. And we worked that way for a better part of a year. And the assignment was, at the time, Nike was exploring this intersection of the iconic Air Force One legacy, mixing it with the intersection of the early Jordan legacies. Those anniversaries were coinciding for a lot of the shoes. And so the task was, can you actually make hybrids out of these two very different, weird-looking shoes? and celebrate the iconic elements of each in different and hybrid ways. So like any young designer, I had to learn the creative process of what divergence and convergence mean. And so we did multiple sketches. These are just a few where Dwayne would hold me to task and tell me how to draw better, tell me how to articulate my intent better. And through countless iterations, we landed on 2 directions: a mid-top using regular leathers and materials, and a luxe high-top version with premium materials that would sell at a lower run, but at a higher margin. And I had to drink my own Kool-Aid, so I had to learn the tools that the designers were being asked to use and deliver my design intent on these 3-dimensional lasts and send that over in tech packs to Asia. And ultimately, we ended up making them in several colors. And this shoe wasn't for everyone, but it was for that sneakerhead that liked the 2 stories coming together of how we celebrated the Jordan 8 with the Air Force One. And it did really well that year, surprisingly. What was typical with Jordan brand at the time, this is like 2010-ish, they flew off the shelves, and Nike got a lot of ammunition around this campaign. And we ended up launching the luxe version in higher end materials as well. And it was weird to see like athletes wearing my shoes out there in the open sort of ether. And it was these 2 shoes were a top seller that spring summer season of 2010. So now my creative curiosities lit a fire, having gone through this process under the Jordan brand's mentorship. And then that door led to other open doors. So Nike Running, the Innovation Kitchen, allowed me to come in and experiment with their designers and learn from them and make design contributions. So I'm getting a chance to cut my teeth in the Nike environment, but working 2 jobs roughly for about 3.5 years to just make these opportunities happen. And what was happening outside of the walls of Nike, I was also watching what the world was sort of doing in terms of embracing the collision of business, design, and tech. And I was reading up a lot on this stuff and watching exemplars like IDEO and other places, the D School, in terms of how this was being embodied. And I felt, wow, I can identify with my own story as it was playing out, that I could live at that intersection if I wanted to. And I think after enough experimentation, enough stretch assignments, those experiments informed that I could actually live there if I wanted to. But I had to be honest as well and do a self-inventory to say, you know what, after that experience, do I have enough creative seasoning to really say that I have a creative foundation that I could walk on and stand forward with confidence and credibility? And I had to be honest and say, you know, I haven't done enough. I need more foundation. So after 5 years at Nike, I ended up quitting my job and I applied to Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, California, and was able to come into the graduate industrial design program. And that was a career gamble, because at the time I was married, I had a son that wasn't even 1 yet, and to leave a secure job was very scary. But thanks to my wife and the belief, and then looking at my son and saying, what would I want him to do if he were in a similar position? And I would have wanted him to absolutely go for the dream and do what was necessary to make things happen. So we packed up the home, moved down to LA, and started this journey. And Art Center had actually changed at the time. They had moved away from just purely celebrating the practicum of classical industrial design to really embracing the latest in technology, the latest methods of making, but also really bringing in the business aperture and actually asking the students to position their proposals as a venture proposal, not just a singular design proposal. And so half the graduate program was very much the practical skills of making, but also the other half was, how do you make this a narrative that has desirability, feasibility, and business viability, and present that to perhaps VCs if you wanted to start a business. And also part of that was learning the investigative methods of how do you actually explore what people want, or what latent frictions are out there that you could potentially solve for things that they may not know that they want. And as a part of my thesis, as I was finishing up Art Center, I wanted to develop something for the endurance running community, and a space of which I was very passionate. I ended up exploring a thesis of how you could actually move endurance runners into the state of flow, where they could actually just leverage the latest and leveraging their music and digital applications around coaching, but keep running like a more of a natural thing and keep people in that state of flow. And so through iterations and using open source prototyping and staying immersed in the running community, working with coaches and people out there in running clubs, ended up developing a finger-mounted wearable that could allow you to control your music and coaching applications, but without having to look at a screen and without having to interrupt your natural running flow. Well, that project, I was actually seeking capital to launch a business around this, a whole coaching platform and tangible offerings within that ecosystem. But that helped me meet the founding partners of what is now my company. And just, it's the network effect. It's serendipity, where having a friend that knew someone, they saw the work that I was doing, in this project, as well as helping entrepreneurs in the LA area. They were also coming from a place where they had long runs at McKinsey, helping to advise senior executives the world over on growth and leveraging digital to evolve growth. And they also stepped into private equity turnaround situations to help actually serve as operators in these companies and leveraging digital to figure out how to grow. Well, I think all of us wanted to move away from the present paradigm of waterfall, where a lot of large corporates actually leverage perhaps a strategy firm for a while for millions, and then hand off to a design firm for a while for high expense, then off to several tech implementers with several handoffs. And after a few years, you might, if you're lucky, have a prototype that you could test product market fit with. But the thesis upon meeting these guys was, well, why don't we just wrap all the disciplines around the table from day one and have that team get to an integrated vision much faster, and then have that same team prototype whatever it is that we're thinking of that can address the friction that we see in the market. And then let's go launch a business that can allow us to build, measure, and learn in market as fast as possible. So upon meeting and figuring out how to work together, we helped a couple large corporates in the founding partners' Rolodex. And that attracted the likes of Booz & Company first. They took a bet on us. They called us Booz Digital, 10 of us, and we just started helping clients that Booz had. And after 10 months, we were 70 people. So there was clear resonance for the capability that we were trying to offer. Unfortunately, and fortunately, at the back end of 2012, or 2013, sorry, Booz decided to sell themselves to PricewaterhouseCoopers. And no disrespect to PwC, that wasn't necessarily the right parent company for our little incubator that we were forming. And so we decided to leave as a founding team. And thankfully, BCG saw our capabilities, saw the traction that we had with Booz Digital, and gave us an opportunity to come into BCG. So our mission, now that we're 600 at 7 to 8 innovation centers around the world, is to invent, launch, and scale game-changing businesses with the world's most important companies, most of whom BCG serves already in a strategy capacity, but we get to bring together design, strategy, and tech and spark a startup team and invite them into the startup so that we leverage their know-how. So it's playing back to this. This is the secret sauce when people ask us, like, what do you guys do? What are you about? It's really about giving ourselves an avenue to really mine that intersection. And I truly believe that's where the future currency of what our future marketplace will require. And so we're all about nurturing our people model to ensure that we're mining that intersection as much as possible. And then when we team with large corporates, we get to take advantage of their existing core assets, their distribution, their brand, their relationships, their supply chain, and we can take those learnings, but injecting that into the startup that we've created. So we mate their knowledge with the startup audacity, and we have something that is uniquely advantaged. And so we explore growth, because typically there's all kinds of corporate partner needs. We explore growth, whether it be a 0 to 1 business that we want to spark that could challenge their core business before their competitors do, or it might be a new business that pursues adjacent revenue beyond their core. And the horizontal stuff in the bottom quadrants is more or less like we might have to work on what they already have also in terms of their digital platform and ensure that it's working and up to par. But ultimately, though, it's about getting our people to work and gel together, but getting out to the field and understanding the friction, understanding the behaviors, the unmet aspirations, the motivations that we can really understand to get a sense of people's openness to entertain new ideas. One fun anecdote is we had a colleague jump in a cab in Singapore, and this gentleman had 50 devices all throughout the car, even iPads in the visor to help provide entertainment for backseat passengers, or cameras all throughout the car to protect himself in case of an accident. He has evidence of what happened. And he's even wearing a Fitbit. I mean, it's just like so much. And when you actually open your eyes, before we even have a chance to talk to him, if you just open your eyes and observe, there's all types of jobs that he's actually hacking to improve his daily experience. And we can take inventory of that stuff to understand the pain points and the sources of delight. And we can get inspired about all the things that we could create for him as he's managing through the gig economy. So we devote a lot to our space. I mean, thanks to BCG, they've really gave us the architects, and they worked with us to really understand, like, how do we further enable what we do? And so they created this very much this Medici style, like Beehive, where we can ring fence these venture teams and give them a home, a war room, but we can provide cohort villages for people to go rub elbows with their fellow counterparts outside of the venture. So we have villages for design, villages for engineering, villages for digital strategy. And this just gives you a sense of how the team works. Again, very multidisciplinary, people learning how to work with each other and gel, find that chemistry, but we give people their own desks to sort of do the head down work so that they can bring a good idea, a thoughtful idea, back into the team room. And we give them space to celebrate those design superpowers, those abductive bottom-up methods, so that we can find the less than obvious pattern and intuitive path forward. So the group that I lead, and just to wrap up in the next last couple minutes here, is strategic design. It's one of the multidisciplinary cohorts. And we describe it as the study of human behavior in context, but we're not just researchers, we're designers that happen to have research ethnographic skills as a core weapon. But let's design holistic solutions against the frictions that we uncover. And it's really about, like, usually a lot of quant and qual is there from a conventional sense, but what's usually missing is that attitudinal stuff, the deeper implicits that we need to go find and mine for. And we use design thinking to really catalyze the collective mind share against those opportunities. So, as Dana mentioned, we're definitely future forward. Like we definitely want to embody this notion of future foresight. So as we look to the future through a proverbial lens, that multidisciplinary team enables you to see the future through the lens of people, through the lens of challenging industry paradigms. And then we can bring in fresh inspiration through trends and exemplars, and constantly curating and constantly building relationships in the open ether. We can bring all these fresh inspirations to bear through a design thinking process. And in our world, the clock is always ticking, so we have to do a lot of parallel pathing. We don't have the luxury to wait until the discovery is done to bring things forward. We have to move. And I thought about, like, that's a nice, clean, linear process, but it's never that clean and linear. And I sort of, on the way here, sketched on my iPad, like, what is the process really? Well, usually there's a lot of chaos when we start a relationship with a corporate partner. They're anxious about growth. They're anxious about losing margin in the core business. They're anxious about competitors moving at lightning speed, the Ubers of X, Y, and Z. And how do we make sense of that and comprehend the needs and then begin a journey through that creative process? But also not lose sight of their present core business of what it needs to do and ensuring that we're also helping them with the re-engineering and reimagination of what they're doing already to ensure that we can feed an innovation horizon for them. So just to wrap up, and I know, I'm sorry, we're going over by a couple minutes. All that to say, and I can share more about the company, and breaks and stuff, but for me in my path, curiosity was the defining thread through every major chapter of career experience. I'd be lying to say that was all planned, because it clearly wasn't. But following through on curiosity, I think, paid off in spades to be able to begin to experiment on that curiosity. And you start to have evidence that you can hold up and attract others to want to, like, identify with your story and find ways to help each other. And sometimes you have to definitely listen and quiet yourself down and listen to your core voice and ensure that you're addressing that voice amongst the many voices. You have to embrace creative risk. Sometimes you have to creatively destruct your career to get the things that you want and want to pursue. And then lastly, I'm an avid believer in the T-shaped notion when it comes to talent. And so how can you empower your T? And if you're not familiar with the T-shaped model, some people call it pie-shaped model, it's about, like, as you're navigating your career inflections, how are you building breadth as well as depth? So breadth, can you actually communicate and collaborate with people that are different from you? And that's what the future is going to want from us, each and every one of us. But then also, do you have experiences where you have a depth of a couple areas of deep expertise where we can actually hang our hat on your skills and trust you that you can contribute tangibly to those core ingredients? And so for me, in terms of how I shape my T, it's about getting after ways that I can empathically identify with someone's friction and being able to solve for them with authenticity. So with that, thank you.